Hello and welcome back to the Data Privacy Lawyer. My name is Funmi Owolabi and I'm the principal attorney. Today's review, we're going to be looking at cookies. So basically on this channel, if you're brand new, I just take a look at different organizations and just give my opinions, and helps me understand what different companies are doing when it comes to personal data, and also give my opinion on some of the practices that organizations are doing. We're looking at cookies today. So for anybody that's new, cookies constitute personal data. The definition of personal data is very broad, and essentially personal data it's two factors, but essentially it's information that identifies an individual. Cookies fall within this definition. And so organizations have a responsibility, if they're going to be using cookies, to one, be transparent. Secondly, provide notice. There's like a checklist that businesses need to follow when they process personal data. There's different types of cookies, and there's also another category that is ever more used by organizations called tracking technologies. Now, these tracking technologies could be things like pixels or beacons. I've done other reviews on cookies on what this constitutes and what this could look like. There's a lot of review that's done by privacy lawyers when we are helping clients build their websites, because some of these tracking technologies can identify an individual, and there's a very specific way that those need to be distributed on the site, and then notice needs to be presented to consumers before those features are utilized on a website. Now, something that a lot of websites are grappling with, at least in 2026, is there's general consensus that cookies do constitute personal data, which is why we've got so many cookie policies and why I review them on the site. I guess there's not a lot of discussion right now on tracking technologies. It may be because companies aren't using tracking technologies. I find that surprising based on websites I've personally seen, or they don't realize that they need to provide notice in the same manner that they talk about cookies. So I don't want to spend too much time on that. Let's look at the banner. The website uses first and third party cookies to ensure you get the best experience on the site. So we're going to customize, which is what I always do. Now, let me show you something. This is called a preference center, right? We've got necessary cookies, preference cookies, statistic cookies, marketing, and unclassified, right? And this particular banner is facilitated by CookieBot. Now, one of the things that I do, and if you go out, check on my website, one of the offerings that I have is I will make a recommendation on different consent management platforms that I think are appropriate depending on the client's needs. And I offer that as part of one of the services from the firm. Now, the reason I've mentioned that is because I am a US-based lawyer. I'm based out of Washington, D.C. for the firm. So my experience when I do these reviews is based on an IP address in the United States. Now we can see here that we've got necessary cookies that help make a website usable by enabling basic functions. This has already opted me in. This toggle has been opted in, right? But we've got a couple that we have the opportunity to exercise our preference on. Do I want preference cookies to remember my information and the manner in which I behave on the website? Do I, for me, want that? If I don't want it, I can click off. The one that I'm not able to click off of is the necessary cookies, because the website cannot function properly without these cookies, right? And this is information that us privacy lawyers will study. We can also opt out of those that are not necessary, like statistics, right? Like marketing, okay? So what is the value in this? What is the value? Why do we have the option to have a preference center? We have the option because the legislation dictates that if the legal basis that is going to be relied on is consent for processing personal data in some capacity, right? The capacity here is cookie collection, right? We have different types of processing activities. The processing activity we're looking at today is cookies associated with the website, collection of cookies associated with the website. When we see the preference center, we can understand that the legal basis that a company is relying on in order to conduct that processing activity is consent. Now, consent has certain factors that need to be met. We're not going to talk about that in detail today because this is a cookie review. But the crux of what you need to understand is if an organization is going to rely on consent, they need to allow individuals the opportunity to withdraw as easy as it was to opt in. Now, in the United States, there's a bit of nuance to that. When it comes to cookies, the obligation that organizations have is to present the option to opt out of cookies. In other geographies, the opportunity to opt in is the required standard under the privacy legislation. So I'm a US lawyer. I access all of these sites in the United States. So there is that consideration in the fact that for those that were not necessary for the site to function, I had already been opted in. Now, something that I think is valuable when it comes to the user experience, which is something that we talk about a lot as privacy lawyers, is making sure that it's clear whether someone's been opted in or opted out. If I click this, right, my presumption is that I've allowed it, and I'll tell you why, because this changed. Did you see that? I've opted off, okay, and these buttons changed at the bottom. But something I think would be valuable, and why I had mentioned this preference center, is because something that some companies are incorporating now is they're making it very clear when you've opted in and opted out, meaning the color for this toggle button will change so that consumers are clear that they've definitely opted out. Because as it currently stands, the only way that I'm able to make the distinction that the cookies are going to be collected or not be collected is because the necessary one doesn't allow me to change it from on to off. So I'm now clear that this is the necessary cookies are on, which means that I can understand that if I click the preference cookies on, I'm also acknowledging that preference cookies will also be collected. But I know they're off because this one is different and the buttons change, right? Now, would an ordinary consumer who is buying clothing from the site understand that? Maybe not, okay? So I think that changing the color here would be really valuable, and that would be something that I would probably have as an opinion for an organization if they're looking to update their preference center or create them at the beginning. So we spent a lot of time on this preference center, but I think it's important because companies need to realize that your cookie obligations don't stop at just drafting a cookie policy on your site and leaving it. There are also other responsibilities, which is why we even see a cookie banner and we have a preference center. Now, I don't know all of the geographies where the products and services for this organization are being distributed, but I did see that they've got free returns on the UK at least. And then they've also got something here called international delivery. So the presumption is that they are delivering and processing personal data, at least globally and in the United Kingdom. Now, one of the main questions I always ask clients is, in which geographies do you provide your products and services? That's very important because the privacy legislation varies country to country, geography to geography. So I really hope you enjoyed this review. We didn't get into the cookie policy itself, but I'm planning to do that in the future. So I really hope you enjoyed this review. If you have comments or questions, leave them below and I'll see you in another one.